Well, I think we are live. It's time to start complaining about how challenging and how undesirable everything in our life is
Everything.
today.
It's the worst. It's the worst, especially people. I think that's
People. Let's talk about people, shall we?
everyone's favorite thing to complain about, other people. And if they would just
Today,
be different, my life could finally be great.
Daphne and I are going to spend today's episode complaining about the top 3 people that annoy us the most.
For at least 57 minutes. And then we'll spend the last 3 with just our calls to action.
Let's get this thing started.
Welcome to Life, the ultimate choose-your-own adventure game with hosts Cliff Ravenscraft and Daphne Scott. Join this dynamic duo as they explore the profound concept of life as a thrilling adventure, blending ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Embrace the joy of living with presence, creativity, and playfulness. It's time to navigate the game of life together. Are you ready to play? Let the adventure begin.
Let's navigate this thing we call life. What do you think about that, Daphne?
In the navigating.
So what are we talking about today, really? I know we opened up with a lot of complaining there.
Well, we are going to talk about complaining. So we are going to talk about complaining, and I want to put it through the frame of understanding what a habit it becomes. I think that's where I really want to go with it. I mean, we're going to talk about the psychology a bit behind complaining. We're going to talk about why we do it. What do we get from it, so to speak, which are more when I say what we get something from doing it. However, I think the thing that I really want to talk about through all of that is how it starts to become a habit. And that is really where I think the detriment of complaining comes into it, because it does do something to our brains. We can be drawn to the negative things in life much easier. Complaining would be one of those. And then what to do about it and why we might want to do something about it. And I guess I would say the antidotes to it. It comes with a great detriment to our well-being. So, and it's a habit, and it is, I don't know if you've noticed, but it can be fairly pervasive.
It can be. And one of the things that comes to me as I think about this topic, there was a client I met a couple of years ago. We were working together, and he says, okay, I have decided that I want to put an end to 3 different things in my life. I want to make a commitment that every day I will go without condemning, criticizing, or complaining.
Yes.
And then he came to me a week later. He says, I didn't realize how much I condemn, criticize, and complain. This is going to be much more challenging than I ever imagined. So that's the first thing that came to my mind as soon as I saw the topic today.
Well, and I would agree, being a human on the planet, that in my own life, let me be real clear. I am not free from complaining. I'm not free from it. It happens quite regularly. What I will say, there has been a benefit to those catching it. Awareness is always the thing, right? And then the choice to avoid doing that thing. And I think this is where the psychology behind this comes in. Why complain? What is it? What's missing? What do I get from the complaining? So I think there's a few things to that. But yeah, it is. I mean, I really appreciate you saying that, because it is such a habit. It's so incredibly pervasive. We'll get into more of the whys behind this in a second, that it is a challenge to really shift it. But the benefits, let me say this, and the benefits of shifting it, though, are dramatic. And we're talking about playing the game of life. What I would say is that if you find yourself in the regular habit of complaining, I can promise you're moving very not well in this game of life. You will actually just stay on the same square at the top of the board or bottom of the board, wherever your game is. You will just stay in the same spot. Complaining really doesn't do much to move you forward or move you anywhere, really.
So looking at the outline that we did, there was a question in there. What is complaining? How would you define what complaining is? I mean, we think about, as I looked at that question today, and by the way, I did not go look up the definition of complaining, which is what I typically would do. But I just looked at the question. I'm like, there are so many words that I just assume that I know what that means. It's like there's something that I don't like,
Yep.
and I express a judgment about
Yep.
it.
And I think what I would add to that, I love that. So something we don't like, we have a judgment about it, right? We're saying a thing or a person. I like to say person, situation, or circumstance. Fair.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And what I would add to that is that it is recycling. This isn't something that you just say once. It's something that you keep repeating it. Like, I don't like this thing and this person is doing this thing and I'm just going to continue. There's a pattern and a rhythm to it. It just keeps recycling and
So
recycling and recycling. And I think that definitely makes it a complaint. I'll have people say like, "Well, I'm just venting." I'm like, "Okay, but you've been venting for like 7 years." Yeah.
yeah, what I love about what you just added on there, and I think and I don't know that it will matter in the ongoing flow of our conversation, but what came up for me is when I heard you add on the cyclical
Yeah.
nature of it, the cycle, that in my mind, I would call that's when you know that you have a
Yes.
complaint. A complaint is something that is cyclic, or it comes up and it revolves and you recycle it. Whereas complaining, or just having, expressing a complaint, is different than having a complaint. Does that
Yeah.
distinction land
Yeah,
for
I
you?
mean, it does land for me. In the having it, it's like it's become a part of me. Almost like it has me actually, right? Like it
Yeah.
has me versus I have one. And I think this is where it's almost hard for me to talk about this now without getting into the antidote to it. But if I have something I don't like and I simply go address that as best I can, like it's completely possible to have things that you don't want to have a certain way in your life and to take action to deal with that, right? So I could say in that microcosm, I had a complaint and I took care of it. What we're talking about is where there is no action there and the complaint has us. I love that. It has us and we recycle it.
Another Another thing that comes up for me is we're having this dialogue, because this is new dialogue between the two of us. That's what this whole purpose of this
Yeah.
podcast is dialogue about these topics. Another question I have about complaining, does it have to be verbally expressed? Or if, like, maybe I don't ever express my dislike of a situation, and I don't even like show up in a different way for other people, but me myself, I feel like it's possible and that I've had a complaint. And this is why I'm
Yeah.
asking, I just to see what are we actually
So
discussing
important.
today, and what is the fine line between what is complaining and what is something else with a different word that would be a better
Yeah.
descriptor. So I'll give you a
Okay.
perfect example. I drove home the other day and I looked up on the side of my house and I saw the little vent that the little air thing from the bathroom goes out. It was kind of propped open a little bit. And I'm like, my gosh, is another bird, living in that little vent
It's a great place
area?
for a bird. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, so for me, I'm like, gosh, we spent a lot of money to have people come out and block up all these things to keep creatures outside of our attic that aren't supposed to
Yeah.
be there. And so I saw that the vents were all propped open, and within me I had a bit of a
Okay.
complaint. Now, I wasn't judging anyone else for not doing their job. I have no reason to believe that anybody particular is at fault, but all I know is I looked up there, it's like, I don't desire that to be like that. I don't desire to have a bird up in that
Yep.
vent, and I don't want to have to do anything
Oh,
about it. And so therefore internally, and I think this was where it becomes a complaint, is that I don't want to be bothered by who. I can't be bothered by this. And but I'm unhappy about it, but I currently have no intention about doing anything about it. And yet I'm aware that there's a sense of
yes.
dis-ease about the fact that I witnessed something I don't like. And so in a way, I'm holding a complaint, but I'm keeping it within myself. Does that count as complaining?
Well, how many times did it recycle through your mind? Because I'm gonna put a line in the sand on this one. So even in
All
your
right.
so I assume you didn't go in to Stephanie and say, Stephanie, the birds are back. we got to do something. And I'm not going to do anything about it, but I'm going to sit here and rattle on to you about how we paid this money and the birds are back and we can't get them out of the vents. And I assume you didn't do that. You just kept it. Okay.
No.
And then
No, this is the first anybody has heard of it outside of it, just rattling through my mind when I saw it the other day. And then, by the way, I came back a couple of hours later from a different trip and it was closed. And I'm like, maybe I just won't think about it anymore.
So did it come to you 3 or more times? Okay.
No,
then I probably would
absolutely
not put that in the, complaint department as we're defining it. I think when it comes up 3 or
Okay.
more times, that's when you start to have a recycling issue, right? Even if you haven't, gosh, such a great distinction, by the way. Even if you haven't verbalized it and it's living in there and it's recycling and recycling. And, I think this is really great because we have different ways of managing it too. You could just become really passive aggressive towards the birds. Right? You could be passive aggressive about it and not really express that you have a request or you want something different than it is. And that's a great way to build resentment. It's a great recipe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think 3 or more times. I'm just going to put that line in there. It's recycling. It's taking up psychic energy. It's taking up your psychic space. Right. Yeah.
All right. So now we have some lines drawn. We know what we're talking about. These are undesirable experiences within circumstances, relationships, and you said something else, life conditions
or situations.
Okay, wonderful. So where do you want to go next in this conversation about complaints? Do you want to talk about the struggles and the pain that it causes
I thought
us?
I would give you some time to just air all of your complaints for the next 30 minutes. Just kidding. Yeah.
So I will tell you and share, because you know me, I have a tough time just thinking about things in an abstract way. So Cliff has to just bear all of his dirty laundry here on the podcast to really show that I'm tracking with the conversation. So when let me tell you, when I first got married, Daphne,
his seating. If you can see this on video, he's adjusting. Get ready.
When I first got married to my lovely bride, I had all sorts of expectations about what a husband's responsibility and role in the relationship and what a wife's responsibility and role in the relationship is. And when we were dating and all this other stuff, none of these conversations ever happened or anything like that. And then all of a sudden we move in together and now we're married.
And it's perfect. And all your expectations are met.
And not every expectation that I had kind of manifested itself into this relationship. And so I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? I don't know what to do about this. And I kind of just, I'm just going to be accepting of what is, and I'm just not going to rock the boat and all of this other stuff. And so I just basically suppress all of my unmet desires and unmet expectations. And I just shovel it all down and shovel it all down and shovel it all down. And Daphne, I am embarrassed. Actually, I'm not embarrassed by anything. It's just a fact of what I did. I did the best I could with what I had to work with at the time. But at one point, about 3 months into our marriage, my wife still has the letter. She refuses to let it go. She will share it with you. I wrote my wife a handwritten letter that was multiple pages in length of all the ways that she was not living up to my expectations.
I love this so much. So it took 3 months.
I submitted a formal complaint.
How many pages was it?
I don't know, but I could go get her and ask her. She'll be able to tell you.
She kept it.
She still has it
so much. And so that's her response. She's like, "Yeah, oh, I'm hanging on to this."
Oh yeah.
She didn't even.
This is going to come in
I bet your
handy
expectations
one day.
were really shocked then because she didn't even flinch.
Oh no! Let's just say that it was a challenging season of life, to be sure.
But more sincerely though, you nailed it. So like you had some expectations, right? Like you set up this sort of world in your head about how things were supposed to be, how they should be. And man, reality just suddenly was like not matching that at all. right? Say
Yeah.
a little bit more too about, you repressed. I think this is really helpful when we talk about complaints, because you also talked about you repressed it in some way. Like you kept
Yeah,
ignoring it or
so I there yeah, so here's what would happen is occasionally I would have a strong desire that this certain situation would happen in our relationship, and that would go unmet, and I'm just not
yeah.
interested. And I would actually start to feel a little bit of rejection, which turns into a little bit of emotion. Actually, okay, a lot of a bit of emotion,
Tiny bit.
and and then I start getting
Yeah.
angry, and then here's another very damaging belief at the time. I shouldn't be
Yep.
angry.
Yep.
Don't let the sun go down on your anger. And so I shouldn't be angry. Let me press that down, put it back in the jack in the
Yep.
box. And if I could just push this thing down and get the lid on this, then everything's fine in our
Yeah.
relationship. Our relationship is great. There's peace has been
That's right.
restored. As long as I don't express my emotions and my beliefs and my thoughts, let me just be the peacemaker here. And so I did. I repressed a lot of those emotions. I did not allow myself to sit in
Mhm.
them. Instead, I had a complaint about my emotional
Yeah, so you went from
states. It's like,
complaining what could have been complaining about Stephanie, you pin it back on yourself. This is very important
yep,
because I will tell you 99.9% of the time that's what happens. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. We will start complaining out there and then we will turn it back around on ourselves. Well, it's just me, right? I
yeah,
recognize, and I want to say more about this because it's so important. I recognize, oh, I can accept just, the way things are. I have to get to we talked about Byron Katie several times in the show. I have to love what is, and I shouldn't be so demanding. I shouldn't have these expectations. I shouldn't have so many needs, fill in the blank. That's my shtick as well. Until I don't. And then when I get done doing that, it comes out, right? So like you wrote a
yeah.
letter, right? For me, it would come out as a volcano. I can be like, hey, like I really want to spend time with you. Just this, Bridget and I we were talked about the eclipse at the beginning. We were camping and she was watching one of her shows and I noticed that I felt this moment of just like, oh, I feel a little ignored here. Like we're camping, we should be talking, we should be engaging with one another. And she's on her iPad watching this show. Like, what is that all about? So it starts. I call it the chirping, right? The chirping starts.
Hmm.
Now, I'm pretty dialed in on that. Like I'm like, okay, right? You can get upset. You could act out around it. What other million options could be available to you so that both of you could get your needs met? Obviously, she wants to watch her show. She's relaxing. She seems perfectly happy over there, right? Doing her thing. And you also are recognizing you would like some attention. So how might you go about getting it, Daphne? What are all the ways you could do it? And so I just tapped her on the shoulder. I'm like, when you finish your next segment of your show, would you be willing to spend a little time together? Right? I'd like to spend some time talking, about what we thought about the eclipse today. So I had like 3 or 4 different things. Of course, she said yes. So, I think it's that process of recognizing how we can engage. I mean, this is the work. This is it. By the way, whether we're talking about an intimate relationship or relationships with people at work, this is it. Instead of
Yep.
all the sort of weird moves that we can make that ultimately don't get us what we want and ultimately don't get other people what they want either. Right? It never becomes a win-win-win. It
Yeah.
becomes sort of a win-lose sort of thing. And so how can we express that? So in your case, you did finally crack and you wrote a letter.
I did crack and I wrote a letter and I let all my emotions out in the letter as
Yeah,
well. It was a very cathartic
I
thing
bet.
for me. I don't know that it was wise to deliver the letter to Stephanie, but but we learn, we
Yeah,
live, we
hopefully.
learn. But I'm thrilled that this happened so early on in our
Yeah.
marriage, because not too long after that, we ended up going to an incredible marriage seminar that opened our minds to how to have open dialogue, open communication. And it was very early on in our marriage that we learned that unspoken expectations will never be
Never.
met.
It's impossible.
So the problem was the fact that I had never spoken about this is the way that I see marriage. And not necessarily that I need to say, okay, Stephanie, let's sit down and tell you all the things I expect of you, but to have an open dialogue about, hey, here's some of my thoughts and ideas of what I consider to be the role for me as a husband, and this is what I consider to be the role. And it was interesting because Stephanie and I are like, listen, you and I are not on the same page on a handful of items here, and I think some of those expectations are unrealistic, and quite frankly, I'm not committed to ever living up to
Yes.
those in a handful of them. And it's like, wow, okay, that's interesting. Now, what do I do with
Yeah.
this? And so, we have this dialogue back and forth, and it was just an incredible growth in our relationship, and it was also incredible growth for me
Yeah.
personally, as I begin to challenge some of my beliefs of what's required in a relationship and all this other stuff. And I'm not saying that I settled in any way, but in what I did is some of the things that I thought would be nice to have in our marriage that
Mhm.
weren't there, all of a sudden were there. And she thought, gosh, why would anybody care about that? And I'm like, well, I can tell you one person who cares, and I can share with you all the reasons
Yeah.
why it matters to me. And she had a similar list of things for
Mhm.
her. And then there were the things, it's like, yeah, it's like, this is probably not as important as we've made it out to be. It takes me a little bit to reprogram my neurological brain and its responses to stimuli and all this other stuff. And you know what? We're going to work this
Yeah.
out. And we've been married for 28 years, and today we very rarely ever have any kind of even disagreement or argument today, because and it's not because we're repressing anything. It's just like, listen, hey, here's what I'd like you to
Mhm.
do. Is this something that you are willing to commit to? And we just express our expectations and our desires very openly all of the
Yes.
time.
And that's the work, right? And also to respect each other as different humans. I mean, different people, we all have different perspectives. There's no as much as, and I want to get to this too, as much as I want to believe my perspective is the right one and the only one, it isn't. And so, when you get to know another person or you get to really hear what their expectations are, it is very interesting. Like, wow, okay, I didn't see it that way. I hear that that's important to you. Now that isn't particularly important to me. And if there is something I can do to support you to get that need met, I'm all for it. I'll take on what I can and do what I can, and you get very clear then, and you get to really know each other. If I bring this back to the business world, same thing. Hey, I really want to get this promotion. I really want to have this next job in my career. This is really important to me. Well, that's great. Let me give you some feedback on that. Here's what this means. So that to me is the work. I mean, this is all the relationships, and that's what we're really talking about. When we get to the complaining side of it, though, I mean, Cliff, I think what you're really demonstrating through this conversation is the vulnerability to be able to express, right, what our needs are, expectations/needs. I'd kind of put those in similar buckets. And the vulnerability that comes with that. And it's just something we're not taught how to do very well, if ever at all. We really don't even get that much access to the word no, right? When we're raised on this planet, depending on who our caregivers were, it's do this, do that. You really don't get to own a no from a very early age. You're taught you don't get to say the word no, right? I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. Probably for some good reasons and other times not. Nevertheless, as we get older, then we forget also how to make a request. We forget that we
Hmm.
can do that. I say we forget. I don't even know that we're ever really taught. I don't know that we're ever really taught how to go from, I would like this to be different than it is. Who might I talk to, or where might I make a request, assuming that there's another person involved? Who or where might I go to get this need met and or to make a request for this to be different than it is? And I think a lot of that vulnerability that comes with being able to do that we're terrified of, drives a lot of our complaining. We just forget that we can make a request. And especially in relationships. So we'll just keep it in the relationship lens for right now, relationship bucket. that we can simply make a request. Hey, would you be willing to fold your socks up and put them on the bed? Right? Whatever the thing is. Would you be willing to rinse your dishes and then put them in a dishwasher when you're done eating? And versus, oh, he or she never picks up their socks. He or she always leaves the dirty dishes in the sink, so on and so forth. And then complaining about that to everybody. And then it morphs into something else. So now the thing we're complaining about, we've developed so much resentment. It's not even about the dishes anymore. Right?
Right.
And I imagine had you not written that letter, that it could have been the path that you might have stayed on.
For a
Maybe.
while.
Yeah, for a while, maybe.
For a
yeah.
while.
Eventually it would have
For a while. I don't know that we would have made it to 28 years in marriage if that letter, or at least some other communication form.
Yeah.
When I go into this, the question is how do we communicate? How do we make requests? How do we open up? And if I were to take it into the business world, I'm a coach, right? So one of the things that happens for me is my business is lined up in such a way that I do 8 90-minute one-on-one coaching sessions every week. And I do those on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 1 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. That's my routine. That's my schedule. And as long as people make a commitment to showing up to the call when they're scheduled and not canceling them for any random reason other than some sort of emergency, which I would certainly understand. But, it's like, hey, Cliff, I didn't have a chance to do that thing that I committed that I would do in the last session. And, we're coming up on our session here on Thursday. Can I reschedule so that I have more time to read that? And I'm like, now the question I have is like, okay, my expectation is that this wouldn't occur. All right. But this person is now requesting this. This actually does potentially negatively financially impact my business. This person's not aware of that. So what do I do in the scenario and in that situation? And so this came up for me recently, and I'm like, you know what? No worries at all. I'd love for you to be able to have that as a foundation before we have our next conversation. Okay. Tell you what, I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. because I'm already booked for all of my other slots. And so I ended up having a full day of coaching of 3 calls back to back instead of just the 2. So I did that, and this person wasn't an actual client. This is somebody I was giving a complimentary session to, and so it's like, okay, this happens. This is, however, what I do in that scenario and what I've learned to do is to not take all of the prior experiences of other people requesting last minute reschedules and place the burden of that on this person who's never done this to me before and doesn't know about my expectation and all of this other stuff. Although I do communicate some things in some writing in the way that I do it, but not everybody reads it, right? So for me, what I've come to is like, okay, I'm never going to allow myself anymore to just be upset when somebody requests a reschedule for a non-emergency purpose anymore. However, I am going to do things to let them know about my expectation and how I'd like our relationship to look moving forward. So, for example, when I do invite somebody for the first time to a complimentary coaching session, I say there are 3 conditions I ask you to commit to. 1, choose a date and a time that you will protect, and that you will not need to cancel, all that other stuff. And then, so that language is in there. But then when I bring a client on board, I send them a written agreement. And it's like, listen, please make sure you read this, initial this particular section that says, this is what the expectations and our agreements are about you showing up to sessions and how much time and notice needs to be given in the event. And in the event that this is not met, you forfeit your session with payment still due. So there's written language that describes all of this. But even in the event that happens, it's like, okay, maybe one time, but then we're going to sit down and one of our coaching sessions is going to be talking about, hey, do you remember this agreement? Is there any other place in your life where you're making agreements and you're dropping the ball on other places? Let's have a conversation. This isn't about my hurt feelings. By the way, today I've made a decision to give full grace, even though I could have chosen not to reschedule and you would have had to pay anyway because that was in our agreement and you initialed that. That's not what this is about. Let's have this conversation. I fully trust that moving forward, you won't have this be an issue between the two of us
Yeah.
again. You know, it's like, let's talk
Yes.
about
Well, what you're
this.
catching there is sort of something. I mean, again, it's not about the dishes, right? Like you're catching like, okay,
Yep.
we're in an agreement. Let's talk about what happens when someone breaks an agreement. By the way, I have a very clear definition of agreement, which is an agreement maybe is between two people and it's who will do what by when, right? So very clear.
Yes.
So when someone starts breaking agreements, there must be an acknowledgement of the broken agreement, you know, or if it gets renegotiated, some acknowledgement of that. And when it happens more than 1 or 2 or 3 times, there's something else in there. It's not at that point, we're not talking about just showing up for the coaching session, right? Talking about something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to, you know, when I was leading teams, same thing, you know, hey, we said we'd meet at 8. I'm noticing it's 8:15. It was fascinating. I had one of my team members who would show up exactly 10 minutes late for every meeting. It wasn't about being late for it wasn't about, oh, I got stuck in traffic. It's like, wow, this is very interesting. And after it happened the third time, I'm like, I noticed this is the third time you've been exactly 10 minutes late. Right. And so we had a conversation about that. So you just notice these are when we start to notice patterns. Now, you
Yeah.
could complain about that if you wanted, but what you've done is made your expectation known ahead of time. By the way, that person may not
Yep.
keep the agreement. That's fine. And once that is being broken, now you're bringing that to that person's attention, right? And you're going to choose then how you want to engage going forward. What isn't happening is, you know, you're not calling all your friends and talking about how horrible your client is or how and just going on and then never talking to that person directly about it.
Yeah, and even before all of that, for me, it doesn't have to go that
Or
far, but it could just be a complaint within myself.
yes,
So it's like, oh my gosh, I am so upset that this person did this
yes,
to me. I can't believe this. I know for a fact I put very specific language that says that you're going to take this seriously. Why don't people read? Blah 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 blah. It's
yes,
like, you know, I've come to this place. It's like, listen, this person is obviously doing the best they can with what they have to work with. They actually did request a reschedule at the last minute for a non-emergency reason that doesn't live up to my expectations. This is all just fact. It is what it is. For me to have a complaint about it means that I have to resist that. I'd have to be upset with what is presented to me as reality shouldn't
yeah,
be there.
exactly.
And there's no amount of my emotional, stressful energy that will change what
That's right.
is.
That's right. Well,
And so it's like, okay, now I register that I don't like
yes.
this, but rather than having a negative emotional reaction, which I have had a number of these in things like this in the past, I was like, wait a second, why don't I just say, wow, okay, I know this person has the potential for not living up to an agreed upon commitment. And that's good information for me to know. I'll be looking for a pattern. I did not anticipate having this open 90-minute session, but I'm not going to go and catastrophize and say this is going to be damaging to the financial future of my business because my sessions are worth X number of dollars and I'm going to have to open up another slot
Yep.
somewhere else. But instead of going all that route, I'm like, okay, well, let's go ahead and deal with the situation here. What do I desire to have as an outcome? How will I proceed and work on this particular issue in our relationship? How am I going to handle that when we do connect again? And also, I've got 90 minutes open that I didn't
Yeah.
anticipate. There's a whole lot of things that I could do that I couldn't have done previously in my mind about during those 90
Yeah.
minutes. Wow, what a gift this is. And so I could choose that over having a complaint.
Exactly. So keyword, you still experience yourself. I'm going to go deeper now into the whole consciousness of this complaining thing. You still, even in the midst of that, there was an acceptance of the reality of what is, just a moment of it. Like this is the isness of it. And you were still at choice. you still experience the tone of your consciousness was, I am still very much at choice here about what the next step is that I want to take. I am not. And you said it, you're like, or I could have, it's this person's fault. It's this person's issue. If they were different or would do things differently, I would be able to feel differently. In other words, there's the sort of victim consciousness is what I'm
Yep.
talking about. The victim consciousness that can take over, which drives complaints and the habit of complaining. Or there's the option to go, I guess I'd say higher in a way, in a higher form of consciousness, right? More a higher vibrational energy pattern to say, oh, I am still at choice here. Okay, that thing did occur. And what do I want to do next? I can take responsibility. I can have the ability to respond in a very intentional way and still get my needs met, deal with what the matter at hand, and not have to go into the consciousness of I'm at the effect of what has just happened here. And Cliff, that's what you're really describing in that moment, right? I can make myself really upset. I can blame, I can judge, I can criticize, I can keep doing all the complaining thing, or I can see that I'm still at choice of how I want to respond to this, right? What's my responsibility?
Yeah.
And I think this is the other part of when we fall into that complaining trap, if I want to stay on this example because I think it's a really good one. If you start just going into the complaining trap around your client, the truth is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to take any action. That's, I think, the recycling part of this whole thing that starts to happen is we just keep recycling that. And there's really no responsibility that you need to take for anything. like, how did I create this occurring? You talked about that. You're like, look, I send expectations ahead of time, right? I make it very clear. I address it if it does come up, which it might. And you can go even deeper and say, well, let's pretend that you had this pattern in your business. Well, we've talked about this too. Well, how do I take clients that really aren't committed to being here? And I know that's not an issue for you, but for many coaches, for many people who are doing this line of work, it is, right?
Yeah.
So, when you're really in that realm of fully owning and taking responsibility and being at choice, I think the complaining goes away big time. Yeah.
It does. And for me, I have a choice. I can have a grievance or a complaint.
Yes.
Or I can choose to show up with love and peace and respond from a different way of being in the world. And it's not about letting people walk all over me or anything of that nature. It's just the reality. No amount of stress and cortisol in my body is going to change the fact that that person's not going to be there at 3:30 this afternoon.
Well,
just nothing is going. That is not going to do anything.
Well, except I want to grab this really quickly because except when we ramp up like that, I think this is the other part that comes with complaining and the habit of complaining. We do get big hits of cortisol and adrenaline.
That is
very addicting. It is very addicting. I remember I was working with a client and she was very committed to letting go of the habit of complaining. Like she openly admitted, she's like, that is what I do in front of everybody all day. My spouse, my children, at work. I am a chronic complainer. And she noticed when she really started putting energy around this and stopping herself, first was just catching it and then stopping herself. She's like, there were moments where I didn't feel alive. Now, some of it I think was her learning like what to do with that energy too. Right. But she said there were just moments when she was like, wow, if I'm not complaining, what am I going to do with all this energy? How am I going to feel alive in my life? Because we do get that adrenaline hit when we're doing that, and this is when we're complaining because there's usually judgment attached to that. There's a way that we get to be right. And I think this is also what drives the complaining, right? Like you have an expectation that a client shows up at, as they said and keep their agreement. So you start complaining about that. Well, you get to be right that everybody should keep their agreements, I guess. Right. So we get this sort of righteous hit, adrenaline hit, cortisol hit. Very addicting. Very addicting. Yeah. In my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. There are two different paths of thought that just opened up for me in my mind. And the one that I'll stay on the original path first and see if the other one still is available in a moment. So the first path that opened up for me was the idea that complaint and complaining can be tied to identity.
Yes, for sure.
So there are some people who their persona is built upon meeting their, let's just use the 6 human needs method that Tony
Yeah.
Robbins talks about: certainty, uncertainty, variety, connection/love, significance, growth, and contribution. Well, for some people, being the victim gives them some level of certainty because there's a good chance somebody somewhere is screwing up something and they can be the victim
Yeah.
of it. There's a lot of certainty
Yes,
in
there
that.
is.
There's a lot of connection in being the victim and being the one that's consistently having things done against you. It gives you a lot of connection to other
Yeah.
people. There's also, if depending on how severe your complaint is, there's a level of significance with the amount and level at which you have to deal with other people's
Yeah.
stuff,
Absolutely.
right? And of course, Tony and other people in psychology talk about the fact that anytime 2 or more needs of your 6 human needs are met at a very high level, it becomes an addiction. It becomes actually a part of your identity. It becomes who you believe you need to be, so that these needs that are so essential to your existence are
Yeah.
met.
Well,
So that's the first path that came to my mind and thought, is that in some way complaining, I actually have, there are some people in my life, I won't mention any names, that that I wouldn't say it today, but I've in the past, before I had a higher level of consciousness, I would describe that person, she is a negative Nancy, or she is a complainer. Don't go around her. She will not stop complaining. You mention a topic, she will find a way to
yeah,
complain about it.
that's so funny.
And again, it's a part of somebody. It's like I even identify that person with
Yeah,
that. And so that's the first thing, is just that complaining can be a part of
it is,
identity.
and it actually is how we keep hanging on and framing our identity as well. Because the more that I can complain about this thing that I don't like, it means that I am a person who likes this thing, right? So it's a way we X out parts of ourselves. So that thing is over there, and then this is who I am over here. So I'll complain about all those other things. It is actually a way that we cognize ourselves. We make ourselves exist, to go even deeper on the identity track. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned in our notes there's something about cognitive psychology. Did you want to make any additional point on
Yeah, I
that?
wanted, thank you. What I wanted to bring up was, some of this, although it becomes a habit over time, we do have this hardwired negativity bias too. I've talked about this many times. We are wired in a way, our untrained consciousness is wired to look for all of the things that can go wrong. It's
It's a
it's a
safety
safety
mechanism.
mechanism, absolutely. So, I think it's worth just noting, and I think that's why we come up with practices that are sort of the opposite, right? We have gratitude practices, we have the inquiry practices that we can do, like asking ourselves, well, is that true? This thought has arisen out of nowhere. Is it really true? Those are the benefits of those practices, that we can work with this hardwired pattern that we have that's just doing its best to try to keep us safe. So the negativity bias is very straightforward in that we scan the world constantly looking for the things that can go wrong. The trick is
Yeah.
just not to fall into that and make it more than it actually is, and to turn it into, and you've used the word complaining quite several times, to turn it into a verb. Right? To make it an action that we're taking all the time, that we're going to complain and we're going to look for all the things intentionally that can go wrong and make it more than it actually is. So yeah, that's that. Well, the other cognitive part of this I want to get to when we sort of get into some of the solutions, like how do we work with this? And why do we want to? Like, who cares if I complain all the time? Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Well, before we go into the solutions, I want to
The other
share
part.
the
Yeah.
other path of thought, because it's still open for me to travel
Mhm.
down. And it's another story of when we started this conversation. It was kind of a place where I'm like, do I really still struggle with
Yeah.
complaining? And I genuinely, Daphne, I was asking myself, when was the last time I complained? I don't know that I'm a
Mhm.
complainer. I don't know that I really do much complaining or, judging or condemn, because I think I know that we've defined what complaining is separate from some
Yes.
other things, but but sometimes I'm wondering, it's like, is that something I have a cycle of? And then it occurred to me, it opened up. It's like, here's where Cliff complains about
Ooh,
something. And I'm like, huh, this just came to my
okay.
conscious
This is good.
awareness. So I sometimes talk about the religious environment in which I grew up with being a very fundamentalist, evangelical, Protestant Christian
Yeah.
upbringing. And, I've experienced a broadening of my philosophy of life and my understanding of God and the universe and everything of that nature. And my wife and I broke up with this thing that we would label as, we consider it performance-based
Okay.
Christianity and institutionalized
Okay.
Christianity. And so at one point back in 2011, we made a decision. We're no longer going to go to what's called weekly congregational gatherings. That's what we call them. Some people call it going to
Okay.
church.
Okay.
And so for a very long time, we broke from that tradition, and then eventually we broke from some other more, broader philosophies of the Christian upbringing that we came up in. Interestingly enough, what I'm sitting there is like, some of my biggest concerns that I've expressed from that is how much judgment there is from Christians to those who don't, that don't believe that the way that they
Okay.
do. And so my wife and I sometimes share our beliefs about how terrible that is. And so just the two of us in the privacy of our own car, just the
Love
other
it.
day, we were in passing judgment on people who we don't like, who pass judgment on people that don't believe the way they do. And I'm like, wait a second. We're sitting here right now having a
Yeah.
conversation about a group of people who are doing what we're doing about that group of people doing this.
That's how it that's
What?
how it always is. You become that which
Ah,
you complain about. You can't there's no way around it. Someone's like, "That
yes.
guy is just so aggressive. I don't know why he has to be so aggressive." Have you been listening to yourself?
It was interesting because I was complaining about a group of people
Yes,
who are always
other group of
complaining about
people.
other groups
You
of
can't
people.
that is the
And
joke. That's the
yeah,
biggest joke. Anytime that we're complaining, all you have to do is just pause for a second, and you will recognize that you have just become exactly what you're complaining about with that other person.
this is not the topic of our discussion today, but what just opened up for me is this philosophy that everyone in our life, in every situation, every circumstance, every relationship, every person, what we perceive in them is actually a mirror reflection of what's going on in our own
Yes, it
consciousness.
is. Isn't it funny how it can come out? It's great, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's brilliant. It's
It is
brilliant. It's
great. And when you're aware of the mirror, what is that called? It's
I just call it a mirror.
um
Well, it's just
okay, when
reflecting.
when
I
you
just say that
realize
that
that,
it's just this person is just reflecting back to me, like, my own sort of current space, current consciousness space. That's all that's happening, just being
yep,
reflected back to me. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, my judgment of that person is a mirror of what's going on in my own
Yes.
consciousness. When I became aware that that's happening, I sometimes laugh
I
out
do all the
loud
time.
when I have a judgment of others. And so that's what I was getting at. We
And
were
you
in the
caught it.
car. It was Easter Sunday, and we made a passing comment, and I'm like, "Oh, that's
Mhm.
funny.
"Would you pick up all your stuff?"
I just did
Yeah,
that."
I love it. Like, My kids won't pick up their stuff, and their stuff is everywhere." And then I remember I was working with this one couple. I went to their house, and the garage was a disaster. And I just stood there, and I'm like, "So
Ah.
who takes care of the garage?" That was great. It was classic. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
All right, how do we solve
okay.
this,
Well,
Daphne?
let's talk about, I want to say one thing, and thank you so much for sharing that, in your own reflection of your complaining. I have one place where I allow myself to complain, and it's in my journal.
Mhm.
However, asterisk by this, I, anytime I have a complaint that I put in my journal, I ask myself the question, are you willing to take action on this, or are you going to set this down? And that's really that to me is sort of the line in the sand, if you will, because if I'm unwilling for any reason to take action on it, then I have to set it down, because it will just, I know the impact that it will have on me mentally, my well-being, so on and so forth. So I don't take every complaint that I have very seriously, so to speak. I don't take them sincerely. I think sometimes they're just things that come up that I'm just working through my own. Well, we're always only working through our own stuff anyway. Not all of them require action. However, if I ask myself that question and the question is yes, then I give myself 24 hours. 24 hours to address it or set it down. And every once in a while I have a trusted advisor like yourself, a friend who I can, I call it phone a friend, who is a person. I want to say this, we're going to get into the antidotes, and I think this is a real big one. To have the people in your life who don't simply buy into your complaining, right? Like, I think we all know the person that we could call who would be like, yeah, everything you're thinking is exactly right. And, I'm very, very fortunate that I have people in my life who will listen to me, take what I'm saying to heart, and also ask me questions. Help me challenge my thinking a little bit. They're sort of like the mini coaches in my life. My wife, Bridget, is one of those people, and does it in a very kind, loving way, listens first, doesn't offer advice. There's ways to do that. But if you can find those people in your life and or get a coach, it's invaluable. It's invaluable. So that's one of the things
Yeah.
I'd start off with right at the top. And so how do we solve it? Well, I don't know that we solve it 100% completely right out of the gate. I think that the first part of this that I wanted to bring up was just simply becoming aware of it. And some people
Yep.
just even aren't aware. I wasn't way, way, way back in the day. I'm like, oh, that's complaining. I just thought this was the way people did everything. No wonder I'd go home at the end of the day and feel exhausted. I've just listened to complaining all day, and I've been the one complaining all day. So I think that's the first key is developing our awareness that this is what we're doing.
Definitely our awareness. And as I think about the awareness, it does kind of take being outside of an environment where it's the
Yeah, it
norm.
does.
That we talk about gossip a lot. Most of our gossip is complaints
Yes.
about others or situations and
Yes.
circumstances. So it sometimes takes getting around a group of people who have a higher level of consciousness that don't do this normally, and then when you start showing up with your habitual habit of doing
Yes.
so, it doesn't quite fit in as
No.
well. So one of the solutions that I like to propose in circumstances like this is maybe it's time to upgrade your peer group. Who are the people you spend the most
Yeah.
time with? Can you find a group of people whose lives are more indicative of the life you desire to have when it comes to emotional state management and just overall general life experience
Yeah.
overall?
I
Do you want to continue to be around a bunch of people who complain about every single thing that's going wrong in the
Yeah,
world?
I completely agree with you. I want to also go back to, what you said with the Tony Robbins, the different levels, to recognize. So once you recognize that and you can start upgrading your peer group, also recognize how we get what I would call more of a toxic level of connection with the people we are complaining with. So it feels like we're connecting, and this is especially true in gossip. It feels like we're connecting, but it's a pretty veiled level of connection that you're getting, right? So if you can
Yep.
start having more of the connection with yourself first, to start making the choice not to complain quite as much, and it really is a choice. If you can catch it, you really can stop yourself. It is, trust me,
Yeah.
if you're listening to this, when I tell you it is possible, I have done it. And then I would say the other part is, I think once you can catch that, is asking yourself some questions, right? If I were to make a request, I think this is one of the big ones that I had to learn. And I want to be really clear. I'm still not there can be times I'm not very good at it, but if I were to make a request, what would it be? Notice my languaging.
Yeah.
I'm not telling myself to make a request, because sometimes that feels too scary at first, right? But if I were to make a request, what would it be? If I were to make a request of this person or ask for a change, what would it be that I would ask for? It's also a very interesting thing, and it's one of the reasons I love this question, because there are times when I've asked myself that, and I'm like, I don't even know. And that leads me down a different path of finding that I'm probably not upset for the reason that I thought I was. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that those are a couple of the antidotes I think are really helpful.
Yeah, a similar question to that, and it probably a good question to go along with it is, what do I
Yeah,
desire?
that's probably yes.
What's the desired
Yeah.
destination here? I'm presented with what this
Yes.
is. It's not what I desire, and because sometimes getting the answer to what request would I make
Yeah.
here, well, that's a decision of which request. And maybe an earlier
I
question
like the
might
desire
be,
question.
what's the desired destination? Where do I want to go? What do I want to create from
Yes.
this? Where do this is where I am now. Where do I desire to be? Once I have that, now hopefully that might inform what request do I need to make, and
And you
to
just
whom.
said, and what do I want to create now? I mean, I think that is the ultimate responsibility question right there. What do I want to create from this? Do I want to create more arguing? Do I want to create more, discomfort? Do I want to create more disease here? Do I want to create, or do I want to create this? Do I want to create more peace and more calm and more connection? Oh, I love that question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think those are enough antidotes. It's a practice though. I think that's
I have one more, and I know we only have 4 minutes or so left, but
do it.
I do want to throw in one other antidote, I think, or solution, and that is to understand that complaint comes from something that we're not
Yeah.
happy about. And whenever we're unhappy, there's a simple formula. It just means that our life conditions are not currently equal to our expectations of how we think things ought
Yes.
to be. Sometimes our complaint and our what request am I willing to make here, and all this stuff, that's in an effort to maybe modify and or influence the life condition itself, whether it be the relationship, what the other person did or said, or their future projections of what they may or may not do. And sometimes we do have the ability to influence that by simply making a request, by simply voicing our expectation. You never know. However, that's not always within our control, but what's always in our control is what we expect.
Yes. Yes.
That is always within our control. And so sometimes, what would I have to believe is necessary for me to feel this way about this scenario? And here's a whole system of beliefs that have, and somewhere in here, something has been violated, and that's where my complaint is coming from. And then I might, before I even go and address this with this person, ask myself, okay, I've identified what I believe should happen in this situation that has not happened, and here's why I have believed this is important. But then I ask myself, is it really true that it's that important that I actually have this expectation met? Is that essential? Is it important? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, wait a second, I just thought that that's the way we always did things, and I've operated assuming everybody believed what I believed about this. And if I am now starting to get evidence to the contrary, that not everybody holds this same value or belief that I have, maybe what would life look like if I just dropped the expectation that people would do this? How would I show up if I dropped the expectation? And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, this person over here didn't have to change. I dropped an expectation, and now I no longer have a complaint anymore. It's another possible
It is. And what you're
solution.
really describing is my journaling. Because it's both, right? I think what I learned going through so many of the process and the transformation that I've been working on with my own, consciousness, is I would use what you just described. I would use that as a get out of jail free card, so I didn't have to make a request. I
Mm,
try to just be over here dealing with my own thing, because for me, learning to make a request was the level of vulnerability that I was unwilling to tap into. It was for me, right? This might not be true for anybody else, but
yeah.
to ask for what I needed, right? Or what I believed that I wanted, put it there, to be able to do that was such a challenge for me at a certain point in my life. I would probably put it in the bucket of, it's some being codependent with many, many people in my life, right? Like for me to ask for a need to be met, it just meant there would be no relationship. I couldn't do it. So I learned very quickly. I'm like, okay, it is true that I had certain beliefs and a certain mindset around things. That is true. However, if you're using that as a bypass to not ask for a need to be met,
Yep.
that's a setup. And I want to build on this just one more second further. Hearing no from another person is a perfectly great response, by the way. I mean, I
Yes.
love it when I ask for something and someone's like, yeah, I'm just not available to do that. I'm like, thank you so much. It's really freeing for them and for me, right? And it just keeps I cannot tell you, when I've heard that from people, how powerful that is and how freeing I feel, right? When the relationship is clear. So yes, I love both of those. And Cliff, I think that is the work. I think it's really owning our consciousness and our mindset and understanding what beliefs we're bringing to the table at the same time that it's like, yeah, I do have a belief and I want to ask for this. And if the person says no, I'm totally open to a no, totally open to hearing no,
Yeah.
because I want people to have their own needs met too, right? I don't want anybody saying yes to me if it's not a yes for them. So, because I don't want to say yes to
Yeah.
people if it's not a yes for me. So, I think it's both. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, and seeing how we can manipulate some of these things to avoid sort of taking on the challenges and, working with ourselves. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So, Daphne, it's call to action time. We've earned it. We didn't complain at all.
I want to read this quote though before we get to it.
Oh, yes.
I found this Eleanor
Eleanor quote.
Roosevelt quote and I thought it was so great. It is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. I thought that was perfect.
I
Yeah, I
like
loved it.
that.
I thought it was perfect for complaints. But let's do our calls to action. Okay.
You
Well,
first.
my call to action this week is to go to daphne-scott.com and definitely look up the leadership course that I have posted there. I am going to, in the next 4 weeks, actually be closing it. So I have left it up. It's been up. Anybody can access it anytime that they want, but I'm working on some other projects and some other things that I will be announcing in the future, about probably 2 or 3 more weeks, that I'm working on. And I am going to close that. So if you are interested in taking the course and you are especially a new leader, I really want to emphasize, as somebody who is new in an organization, who is leading a team of people, who is responsible for a budget, who is responsible for for driving some direction on a team, I would highly recommend this course. It will decrease your stress level. There are learnable skills, tricks, and tools that you will learn in this course that will make your leadership life much easier. So I just want to, yeah. And in
Awesome.
about 4 weeks, I will be.
And what's the name of the
It is
course?
called The Waking Up a Leader. Waking Up a
The
Leader.
Waking Up a Leader course at
Yes. And I will
daphne-scott.com.
be closing it in about 4 weeks. So it will not be up there for the rest of the year. Yes.
Awesome.
All
I
right.
love it. And my call to action is simply for my one-on-one coaching. Daphne can tell you she's been working with me for over a decade
Crazy
now.
cakes.
And there are 2 options. One, you could come and spend an entire day with me here in the Next Level studio, and we can create a pivot, a plan for your next phase or season of
Yes.
life. You can learn about that at daywithcliff.com. Or if you want to just dip your toes in the water, you're not ready for a whole day with Cliff yet. All you have to do is email me, because small doses at
Baby
first.
steps.
You got to adjust. So just email me, cliff@cliffravenscraft.com, and put coaching in the subject line and tell me what you're dealing with. And we can potentially get onto a call and talk more. That's my call to action.
I
One-on-one
love it.
coaching.
Well, I do want to still emphasize the day with Cliff. I would say, if you're in a transition, I would say this about the day with Cliff. If you are considering making a transition in your life, and maybe it's from going from being a full-time employee to going out on your own, or even in between those, I would highly recommend it, because the clarity, I've just seen it many times and I was so grateful that I had met you in the time of my life when I did. I think I avoided a majority of pitfalls that I think new business owners can run into, and you had lived them as well. So I learned from your experience also. But I think if anybody's in that transitional stage of their life, I think it's just invaluable to start off with that level of clarity. So put that out there. Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Daywithcliff.com, Daphne-Scott.com.
Perfect.
Until next time, go through life with 24 hours of no condemning, no criticizing, and no complaining. Give it a shot.
Do it.